Welcome to the Igniting Change podcast. My name is Duncan Cook, founder of Three-Sided Cube, trusted technology partner for some world-changing organizations. We know the power that technology has to have a positive impact on people's lives. But on this podcast, myself and my co-hosts Puff and Sophie are out to meet the people behind the technology, hear their stories and understand what drives them, and hopefully inspire others to join the mission and do some good in the world.
Right, so thank you so much for joining us, Hannah, on this very special episode of Igniting Change today. So did you want to introduce yourself? So tell us who you are, what organisation you're with, and what you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Hannah Zitner, the Global Safety and Security Director of Data Analysis and Partnership at the IRC. My role is really cross-cutting. I work on the safety and security team, which for people who know me from my sort of more rebellious past is a bit of a funny thing to think that I'm the one creating and enforcing rules. But I work on the safety and security team. Our goal is to keep our staff safe delivering aid. So whether that's in Gaza, Sudan, Haiti, all the hotspots that we hear about that are volatile, but also here in the US, places like Phoenix, where the acceptance of refugees and our work might not be so high. So it's so the work is both within our domestic programming, so helping resettle refugees, as well as the international work we do, the humanitarian aid that I think we're more known for.
I was going to ask, so Hannah, you made a reference to the fact that people might find it amusing that you make and enforce rules now moving forward. What did you do before this? Like, how did you get this role?
Yeah, so my background is a bit of it's not exactly a linear path. I started my professional career as a journalist. So I entered my first job in a newsroom was in 2006. And at that time, I started working in a newsroom when social media was really in its infancy. I came into the newsroom as the young journalist who didn't know so much about journalism. I had a piece of paper that said I did, but really, experience is a lot. And I didn't have a ton of experience, but I did know how to use technology. And so my colleagues, more senior reporters who had been, working in the field for years, they really looked to me to help them understand technology. And that's where my interest in technology and innovation really began. So I worked for about 10 years in journalism in various countries, in various contexts, print, radio, online, a lot of work online actually. And then decided I didn't want to write about things happening in the world. I wanted to be part of it. So I went back to school and I did a master's degree in disaster and emergency management, with the idea that I would work in the humanitarian sector, probably in comms, just with the journalism background. I worked in comms for a little while. Turns out it was a little slow for me. And a friend, a friend reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to be a security analyst?" And I thought, I have no idea what that is. That doesn't sound, safety and security doesn't sound really like my jam, but tell me about it. And it was essentially just writing about various conflicts. I was living in Myanmar at the time. So a lot of conflicts to write about, a lot of really interesting dynamics. I had just finished this master's degree where, again, on paper, I knew how to run an emergency coordination center. So I was hired to run an emergency coordination center and write about the risks that private sector companies would face working in Myanmar. It was a really good introduction to security, and really is where I came to learn that the way to keep people safe is by arming them with information. And that's where it sort of came full circle of realizing, okay, I'm not here telling people what to do. I'm here telling people how to think about risk, telling them what risks they might face and what to do if they do face these risks. So it was always really about access to information, risk assessment. People are inherently really bad at assessing risk. People are scared of flying, but planes are a lot safer than cars. So, you're more likely to have a car accident on the way to the airport than in the sky. And I thought it was really helpful working with colleagues, helping them understand how to think about these risks. So for me, it was about access to information, training people how to think rather than putting rules in place. Like, yes, sometimes you put a curfew, you say you can't go out after this time. Yes, you have to make sure people wear seatbelts in cars. But ultimately, it was about access to information, which I think is how my link with technology and innovation really began. I think the landscape is forever changing, and you have to really be able to adapt quickly to get the most accurate and up-to-date information, especially currently in this context of so much misinformation, disinformation. Yeah.
And I think there's definitely, to build on that, Hannah, there's an element of, it's not just access to information, it's serving up the right information at the right time when it's most relevant to people. So
Yeah.
I'm going to use an example of, disaster preparedness, let's say. And I can speak from experience. So I've moved from the UK, I've come over here to the US, I'm based in Florida. I hadn't really, being honest, experienced any natural disasters, any hurricanes or tornado watches or warnings in the UK. But coming
Yeah.
over here to the US, it is, and where I'm based, it's more common. And to be honest with you, it had never really crossed my mind to make sure that I had a plan for my family in case of a natural disaster like that. But quickly, it became a priority for me when I was like, okay, now this really matters. I need to do something about this. And it's funny how the content that that is served to me at those times when I feel vulnerable or when I most care about it is super important. But that to me has been a huge learning curve. So I do think there's definitely something with serving that information at the right time, in the right
Yeah.
place.
And I think the right place is especially important. So, you have kids, right?
Yeah.
How you could hand I'm not sure if they're reading age yet, but if you hand them a big 3-ring binder with here's what to do in a hurricane, here's what to do in a tornado, here's the local police, here's the blah, 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 they're never going to read it. If you show them an app, so my stepkids are 10 and 12, if you show them something on the phone, they're hooked, they're glued to it. They're ready to learn. They're excited. If you show them something on a piece of paper, it's not so interesting. It needs to be kind of shiny and sparkly to get their attention. That's not the case with, my senior colleagues. If I were to show them a cute little app, they would think, I don't want this. I want this in a piece of paper. I want professional language. I don't want your stupid emojis. I want it, kind of straight. So knowing your audience for this kind of thing is super important, especially so at the IRC, we work in 50 different countries, and the internet uptake in those countries is different. So, we have an office in Oakland, which is next to the San Francisco Bay Area. Everyone there, I shouldn't say everyone, most people there are pretty intuitively able to adopt new technology. We also have field offices in really remote locations where access to a smartphone might be pretty new. It might be their sole source of technology, but they are so able to use it when the bandwidth is there. So we have a big range of contexts for which we need to plan. And that's really important when we think about how we're delivering our messages that ultimately will keep our staff safe.
And that must be really difficult because I think when you're working at that scale and across such differing, I don't know what the word is, but differing.
Context.
So yeah, like that must be really quite difficult for you guys.
Yeah, it is one of our biggest challenges. So I should say, I started working for the IRC in a field location. So I joined IRC in 2019 in the Democratic Republic of Congo during the Ebola response. And I was the security manager for the team responding to Ebola. So we had about 500 staff altogether, coming from a range of places, including really close to where Ebola was most active. And that was pretty far out in the countryside, to the capital city of the DRC, where everyone's used to modern technology. and then also international staff coming from a range of contexts, some more tech forward, some less. So it wasn't necessarily where you come from, it was just, or your age. It was a lot of different things played into how we would deliver information based on that person's particular profile. But to bring it back to what I was trying to say, joining the organization in a field role has given me really important insight into what works at a field level and what works at a headquarters level. So our headquarters is in New York. We have other kind of major hubs in Jordan, Geneva, and Kenya, and Senegal. So we are truly a global organization. We have about 20,000 staff. Most of them are local staff. About 1,000 maybe are international staff placed elsewhere, but most of them local staff working in their local context. One really good example of where people are coming from their sort of ability to use technology at such a different place is working not at the IRC, but for a private sector organization in Myanmar, where I managed some investigators. So we were doing kind of due diligence work for private corporations. One of the investigators was an ex-intelligence officer for the police in Myanmar. His work, he was maybe 55, he worked exclusively with a pen and a paper, and he would go do his information gathering in person. Like he would go to someone's house and do surveillance basically to understand who they are and what's happening. At the same time, we had a CEO from Canada who has a background in tech and was super tech forward and was implementing some technology that is even more advanced than what we're currently using at the IRC. So this was in Myanmar in 2017, keeping in mind that the internet really just became a thing in 2013 or so in that context. So trying to work with people who are using pen and paper and who are coming at it from like, a degree in computer science is really tricky.
Very, very tricky. And you're right, it all comes down to the people and the use cases. And, something that we do see probably more often than we'd like to see is the technology leading the solution. And actually, that just should not be the case. You have to come back to the people. And trying to solve a problem, sometimes it might not always involve technology. If the technology can, if for example you're trying to scale, well, technology can really help with that, and that's brilliant. What technology you use, again, there's a question mark depending on what specifically you're trying to achieve. But yeah, like you don't want to be using technology for the sake of using technology.
No, exactly. And I love that you brought that up because I think it's important when we think about innovation and where it comes from. And if it comes from, ooh, let's innovate, or if it comes from, we have a problem and let's identify a solution. And I think both are important and there's a place for both of these. But last year at the IRC, I launched an innovation challenge. I did open to anyone, but really targeting field staff to hear what are the problems that they're looking at and how do they think they might solve them. So in some cases, there's technology that our field staff are using that we're not really using here in the West, like mobile banking, for example. It's not really such a thing in North America. In Africa, about 50% of people are using mobile banking. The rest are not using banking at all. And it's been a huge help to a lot of people, especially when you think about disaster affected communities and getting them cash assistance quickly. So that's an example where if you're, an incubator in the Bay Area thinking about how you can help, you wouldn't necessarily come up with that solution. So a lot of the time it's really important to think about locally led solutions. I was at a co-working space in San Francisco last year, 2 years ago, and started chatting with someone who works on product for WhatsApp. And he was saying, I don't understand it. It's so weird. There's such a high demand in Africa for voice messaging. It's used way more than typing. And I explained to him a bunch of the reasons. And he was like, oh, well, I didn't know any of that. And it, to me, was a good example of, if you don't have that lived experience, then you wouldn't necessarily know. So I think it's important to really have that collaboration. One area where IRC is really shining in this area is this, it's brand new. It's called Signpost AI. And Signpost is one of our really great, it's part of the IRC, but it's a bit separate. They provide information to refugees. So it started essentially as a very kind of essentially a Facebook page for refugees in Europe who could go and get access to accurate information. And it has evolved from there. We're working in many different languages, many different countries, many different contexts. And as they were building this app, this, scaling this up, they realized, well, we really have important technology that could be used for other people. They, over the past couple of years, they started using AI, and they're thinking about the risks in a humanitarian context of using AI. So their whole thing is de-risking AI and then making it accessible to other organizations. So if someone from the UN were to say, I want to do this AI project, but it's really risky and I don't exactly know how to do it, they would help them set up a prototype. It's a prototyping lab. So they would help them set this up, help them test it, help them make sure it's safe, and that beneficiaries' data won't be compromised. But it's not them saying, here, do this. It's them saying, bring us your ideas and we'll facilitate it. We'll do the tech. That's what we do. You bring your ideas. And I think that's a really great example of where local solutions and external support are blending really well together.
I think that's an amazing example of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's what did you say it was called? Is it Signpost AI?
Yeah, Signpost AI. So Signpost is the name of the previous product, and it historically was called refugee.info. And I think it started in Greece, helping refugees understand how to, what information they need. How do I get a passport?
Yeah.
Is this border open? That sort of thing, like real-time updates. Information is changing so quickly. So it's a way for people to exchange up-to-date, accurate information. And it just expanded from there.
Which is amazing. And I think that's a wonderful example of how the solution can evolve. And obviously the technology has evolved as well. So started with what was perhaps quite a simple Facebook page and has now evolved to become its own product, essentially, that you've scaled to probably multiple countries and multiple languages, now pulling in AI or utilizing AI to help better it, essentially, to help continuously improve it.
Yeah, and as the technology improves, the use cases are just expanding and expanding, and it's becoming so amazing how easy it is for users. You could speak in any language, well, maybe not any language, but many languages. For us, we have a huge program in Afghanistan, and Pashto and Dari have been languages that are not typically included in a lot of these off-the-shelf translation apps. And it's been really hard to get that information in Pashto and Dari, for example. So these tools are now able to include these languages that were historically sort of left out. The same with in Myanmar, not to always go back to Myanmar, but Burmese is a language that, they only speak it in Myanmar. It's really hard to get good, accurate translations. So now you're able to dictate in any language you want and get accurate, up-to-date information. It's really remarkable.
So it really is. And there's a project going through at the moment that we're in discussions with all around sign language. And it's funny how when you start to learn about something, you now see this all around you. Is that it's almost like you're describing, Hannah, like that local knowledge. So we're working with a team based out of the UK who have or are helping bridge the divide for the deaf community to be able to converse with the wide, like everyone else, essentially, but utilizing AI to do that. So something that I didn't realize is the deaf community, not all of them, but but some of them, if sign language, whether it's American Sign or British Sign, whatever version, if that's their first language, it's often different to the written language. So just the way that it works. So to try and if you're deaf and your primary language is sign, to simple tasks like having a meeting or reading an email or being able to work in an environment is really difficult. And I didn't realize this. Some people are lucky enough to be able to have translators, but each translator can only work 20 minutes at a time. So if you think about how many hour-long meetings have you been, for each hour-long meeting that you're in, you're going to need at least a minimum of 2 translators to be able to have that have a conversation, have a productive meeting. And then you've got things like being able to translate emails and read websites or things like that. So there are many tools coming out and coming to fruition now, but when you were talking about AI and being able to expand and look at different languages, the possibilities of what that will be doing for smaller communities like deaf communities globally is going to be life-changing, nothing short of life-changing. But it all comes down to the data. At the moment, there's not enough data to build these large language models to be able to automate everything. So
Right.
there's a lot of work happening in this space at the moment to try and essentially be able to come up with an incredible solution that can help that community. But there's some just incredible examples floating out there. But the one that you've brought to us today is amazing. So I'm assuming, Hannah, this is an ongoing project that you're doing internally at the IRC.
Yeah, it's sort of in its infancy. We're a big organization, which is great, and it comes with oftentimes a lot of resources, but it also comes with a lot of rules, and the way that the humanitarian sector works is a lot of the money we have is grants for specific reasons. So it's really hard. I've been talking about how great all these projects are and how innovative we are. But the truth is, compared to the private sector, we are behind and we are slow adopters and we're risk averse. And the reason, well, there's a lot of reasons. But one of the reasons is it's not our money to play with. So if we're given money to fund what's happening in Gaza right now, that's not money that we have to try out new things. So we have to, when we're implementing solutions, we have to be really sure that they're working. We just started a partnership with OpenAI to work on some of these AI things. So there are a lot of separate sources of funding that allow us to be innovative and try new things. But for the core work that we're doing, providing humanitarian aid, we often don't have a lot of leeway with how far we can stray from the, and what is most important is getting aid to people who need it. And so that's our primary goal. And some of the stuff that we think will help us be more efficient with this goal, it's hard to test it when we don't actually know. So it's a bit tricky for us. And it's one of the reasons why we are probably a bit slower than other organizations. My husband works in tech. When I first met him, I was traveling to the field a lot, and I explained to him one of the things that happens that is so sort of outdated is you get in a car and the driver hands you a clipboard and you write the mileage of where the mileage for the journey, and then you write the budget code for what project is funding your trip, and then at the end of the journey you write write the mileage again so that they know exactly how much gas has been used. This is all handwritten. These papers are kept in warehouses, I don't know where, but I'm sure it costs a lot of money to store them. They have to be kept for X number of years, depending on the grant. I was explaining this to my husband, and he thought it was so archaic, which it is. And he talked me through a solution in about 2 minutes using Airtable and QR codes and really simple, sort of elegant solution that I realized would never be implemented because it has a low cost to start. You need smartphones for every driver and a bit of internet bandwidth. It's not a lot, but it would be hard to to get it started. So sometimes we're stuck with these kind of analog solutions because it's hard to find the sort of buy-in to get some new projects off the ground.
But I think it's not only buy-in, it's being able to put forward the business case to be able to then do it, and then that whole change management piece to get it through an organization. I don't think you're alone, Hannah. I think
Yeah.
certainly in the conversations we've been having within this season and all of our seasons at Igniting Change is this stuff is really, really hard. And yes, the private sector are ahead, but the beauty that the for good sector has, and that's how I like to define it, is the collaboration, the willingness to share learnings, insights, be open, and help each other. You don't get that always, most of the time, in the private sector. So there are many challenges, but I even think some of the private sector are struggling to keep up, Hannah. I think
Yeah.
the past few years have been extremely difficult in globally, and organizations and companies are running more lean than they perhaps have, but then the expectations and the goals haven't decreased. They're still increasing, and people want more for
Yeah.
less, and that's really, really hard. And I think then there's a it's making it even harder to innovate and to try new things, and for people to be able to put business cases forward for new solutions, regardless of how big or small. Like it's becoming harder.
Yeah, for sure it has. And one benefit we have is that we are surrounded by a lot of organizations that want to help and want to do good. So, for example, Factol, it does real-time alerting. It's a kind of mix of AI and human verification. So if something's happening, when something starts kicking off, let's say Bangladesh, we would get an alert saying, something's happening, and then they have journalists online 24/7 to verify that information. And that's a service they provide to NGOs for free because they're interested in doing good. There's other organizations like Data Miner. They've helped us a lot with some similar kind of information gathering, real-time alerting. So there are a lot of private sector companies really wanting to help us. And I think that that's great. We have really a good relationship with a lot of external providers that are keen to support where they can. So we don't have that same competition that you've described from the private sector.
That is so wonderful to hear, and the fact that you've given shout outs to them, amazing. And what we'll try and do for anyone listening at home, we'll try and put some links in the bio, in the description for this episode, so you have a signpost to go and look for more information. But it's when you hear these stories, it does give me more hope, because I feel sometimes it can feel quite doom and gloom. It's perhaps I don't know, it's quite a dramatic description of it. But when you hear these stories of the fact that there are companies that are providing these services at no cost to these NGOs, it's amazing, absolutely amazing to hear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you say doom and gloom. I feel like that's our doom and gloom is our bread and butter. And so it is really heartwarming to hear of other organizations wanting to support the work we do. And, especially not to get into American politics too much, but there are a lot of people in this current environment who are not happy with the work that we're doing. They see, they don't want us bringing in more refugees. There have been a lot of instances where we've been targeted because of our work. So on the one hand, we feel like there's a climate of hate, really. And then on the other hand, we have organizations willing to support us who believe in our work. And it really does motivate us to keep going.
Yeah. And, I think it's important to shine a light on that a little bit more. It's not, I guess it does feel like things perhaps are a little more extreme. It's more common now than perhaps it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even maybe. I don't, it's just, wow, I hadn't thought of that. And then obviously what that then means for you, Hannah, because I guess that's all risk and safety, security for you and your team having to help
it's
mitigate
really,
that as well.
it's very interesting, having had my early stages of my humanitarian career working in the field and working in places that are thought to be quite dangerous, like Myanmar, like the Congo, traveling to places during conflict like Ethiopia, um, and then thinking like, wow, it's actually the US is facing those same types of risks, and our safety and security posture has to be just as strong here in the US as it does elsewhere. Our team here is really great, and it's new. So I joined the IRC in 2019. At that point, we had one safety and security person for all of the US. Now we have 4, and some people at HQ who support a bit more. So it's really, the environment has really changed. We've had people coming to target locations where we're hosting refugees. We've had people protesting against the work we do. And it's sort of shocking. I'm Canadian, so I'm still used to we have the same kind of politics, but it's more low key. People aren't as loud. People don't have guns. I mean, they might, but they're not legally in the street with them. So it's a really different environment. And I think I haven't quite acclimated to those risks yet. To me, it's still very serious. And, we were talking earlier about how people just get used to warnings. If you're, in Ukraine, there's sirens going off all the time. Some people now ignore them. Here in the US, we have, like on my phone, I think I have 7 alerts right now: storm surge, flooding, tornado, high winds. I'm sitting here. It's not that I'm ignoring it, but I know now that I can continue with my daily business. That's sort of off topic. I've forgotten my point.
No, it almost becomes, and this is where you have to be careful with serving information at the right time. I certainly find it, because so for anyone listening at home, before we came on and we were doing this episode, Hannah and I have just gone through Storm Debbie over here in the US, and we were discussing, what had happened, how we'd gone through the storm, and I think because this was probably storm number 5 or 6 for me now, being over here, I was probably a bit more laid back's the wrong word, more climatized. So, and I felt more prepared. So I wasn't as anxious or nervous going through this one as I was probably my first 3. I think the first one was more horrific. But when you get all of the notifications and it's the first time you're going through something like that, you're really on edge and you're really nervous about it. But once you've been through it and you've done it several times, it's like anything. You become more acclimatized to it and it's fine. But I guess it's the same in terms of the risks that your organization faces. There's going to be new risks that come up, and it is going to be more nerve-wracking going through those versus the ones that probably feel more common. Still doesn't make it less dangerous, but it probably is easier to manage when you've gone through something like that before versus something that you haven't and you don't know how to approach.
For sure. We have an analogy, the frog in the boiling water. If you put a frog just directly in boiling water, it's hot, it's going to jump out. If you slowly turn up the heat, it's not going to notice. And eventually oh, I'm in boiling water. So it's like that with a lot of risks. If you're living in a context or in a conflict zone, the first time you hear gunfire, it's scary and it's nerve-wracking and you don't understand where it's coming from. Eventually you understand the direction it is, how far it is, when to worry, when it's celebratory gunfire, when it's not. And I think it's the same with tornadoes, with hurricanes, with, I've frozen.
No, it's all good. Don't worry about the video.
Okay.
It's just because it's uploading to the cloud. So the actual recording, Hannah, will be fine.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, it's like any risk. You get used to it and you stop being as prepared, which is when bad things do happen. So on the one hand, you understand your context better and you're better able to do that risk assessment. On the other hand, sometimes you get a bit complacent and then things happen.
It's really, but that's a really good point. And I worry, it's really hard to get the right balance.
Yep, it is an art, not a science, this risk management. And you mentioned something about your kids, or you mentioned something that made me think it's the same as like knowing when to deliver information and what to deliver depends on all kinds of things. And it made me think of my stepkids, where when ahead of this storm we were thinking, what do we tell them? We don't want to scare them, but we want them to know the information they need. It was the same. We took them out surfing the other day for the first time, and I was explaining rip currents and what to do, and then one of them started getting freaked out. And it's that balance of what information to give to make sure they're going to be safe, but also not overloading them. And they're 10 and 12, but it's not so different from adults or anyone really that's trying to manage risk.
True, so true. And each child's different as well. So trying to tailor it and then trying to do it at scale. Oh my gosh, hats off to you, Hannah. I feel like you have a very difficult, challenging role here, I see, but it obviously is something that you absolutely love doing.
Yeah, I mean, it feels important. Not to say that I am important, but the work is important. And I think, honestly, in all of this work, whether it's working with technology or innovation or, technical safety and security, at the heart of it is communication. So making sure, as we keep talking about, making sure people have the right information at the right time and in the right way. So when to use a tech solution, when to keep it sort of analog or old school, and when your assumptions totally don't make sense, like in a lot of places, Myanmar specifically, I'm thinking, where people sort of leapfrog over laptops, for example. Everyone uses a mobile phone. Everyone knows how to use it really well. Not so good on the computer, because their first example of using the internet or using a computer is with the mobile phone. So sometimes I think we come up with these solutions based on our backgrounds and our understanding of situations, and not so much a reflection of the reality of those who need the solution.
But you said it earlier, the importance of that local knowledge. And I think having the users or the people that you're providing the solution for being part of that design and development process for coming up with the solution is so important, or at least having them represented is so important, because only then can you get to the right solution and something that is going to be used. And I think too often we certainly see it in the I hate to use this phrase, like the software development space.
Yeah.
So many companies that will just go off and build something. They don't actually care if it's the right solution, and if it's really engaging, it's really going to make a difference and make that impact that you need this solution to have.
Yeah, that's a perfect example or perfect comparison. For within my team, within the safety and security team, we have 50 officers, field officers working in various contexts. When we come up with something at HQ, the initial response sometimes is that it ought to be something that is making their life easier. So we have a headquarters, we have regions, and then we have local offices. Often some of the tech solutions come from HQ and the innovation lab and other areas where people are working with technology. But the only times they work is when it's been built in collaboration with the local staff who are able to use the technology. Sometimes bandwidth is an issue, so we can't have these big clunky, whether it's a training or an app or anything, we can't have things that require high bandwidth. In some places we can, in Nairobi, it's fine. We can have whatever we need. But in deep field locations, we can't. So we need to build things with that end user in mind. And I think sometimes there's this impression that they can't do it. They don't know how to do it, or they don't, whatever, sort of dismissive. And that was one of the reasons I really wanted to do this innovation challenge I mentioned before, is to help sort of dispel the myth that our local field staff don't have the interest or the capacity or the willingness to come up with technical solutions. They are the ones who know their problems, and they are the ones who ultimately are going to know what solutions will work best. We might be able to support that, but yeah.
You're so right. Like, that's such an amazing example, because ultimately the people on the ground, the people can come up with solutions very easily, but what they won't often know is how that could be implemented technically to help them, and doing that efficiently. And I think that's where head office or your partners or your teams can help. It's like help enabling those people to not only come up with the solutions but execute those solutions. I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened with this. Not to keep going back to this innovation challenge, but one of the ideas was a chatbot that helps people digest some of our resources. You can ask it a question. Give your context. I'm a woman working in blah blah blah, and I'm going to blah blah blah. What are some of the risks I should be aware of? And it will tell you. So that was an idea that someone working in the field came up with. We started playing around and building it. To be clear, I'm a generalist. I know how to think about problems and think about solutions. I do not know how to build the technology for the solutions. So me and this guy, a Syrian guy who's working in South Sudan, we're tinkering along, trying to figure out how to do it. And then we realized, oh, there's within IRC itself this Signpost AI kind of lab that could help us. It took him 2 minutes to do it. Super easy. We gave him the content, and it was essentially done. I mean, we're still iterating, we're working on it, but it was so easy. So an example like that, where the idea came from the field, I supported in kind of bringing it, kind of fleshing it out, and then someone else who really does have a background in technology built it. And it was such a great partnership, and an example of how we ought to be using technology and innovating within the sector.
And I honestly, I think this is such a great conversation. And I know there'll be so many people listening that agree with this and can also echo. But what you're describing, Hannah, to actually execute that is really, really hard to do. Like, you made it sounded so beautiful and so simple. But I know the reality is there was probably a lot more digging and trying to locate the right people at the right time to be able to get them to get their time to invest in a project like this. But you made it happen, which was brilliant.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, exactly. Right people, right time. It's people, process, technology. And it happened to be that we had the right people. We were thinking about the process the right way, and we had someone to build the technology for us. So that it was a lucky example. Of course, there's a lot of background conversations of trying to make it happen. But
So that was one innovation challenge. Are you running the innovation challenge again? Are any plans to do any more moving forwards?
we would like to. It was so fun hearing people's ideas, though that was the idea that won. And so we had a panel of judges from our data team, from our security team, and from our IT team. So really wanting it to be a well-rounded, not just me picking. We wanted a well-rounded panel. It was so fun talking to the judges, hearing about, IT, for example. They obviously have a lot of concerns about cybersecurity. The data people have some concerns about how the data will be used. And the safety and security people are more the ones with the practical, like, we need it to do this. Will it do this? So it was a really fun cross-cutting initiative. And most importantly, it's so nice for me sitting at HQ. I work remotely. For me, it's so nice to have an opportunity to talk to staff from all across the organization. So we would like to do it. We'll keep you posted. We'll hopefully have some more brilliant solutions. If not, there were so many other great ideas that we'd love to implement. And I think, especially as AI technology evolves, that some of the solutions that this time last year seemed a bit complicated, I think now might actually be really feasible.
Yeah, and I definitely the rate in which technology is moving is so fast, and I think what's certainly over these past few years, the importance of data, how
Mm-hmm.
that data is collected, the quality of that data. And this is all super important to be able to essentially build these large language models so to enable these, like, I guess, better and more productive use cases to utilize AI for good,
Mm-hmm.
rather than for other reasons.
Yeah.
It's encouraging to hear that this is happening in this space and people are experimenting and learning as they go, and trying these things. I know it's hard. I understand, and I think you mentioned earlier, just in terms of you're reliant on grants and external funding and being able and fundraising and being able to get the money. But I think there's a certainly, and it's still the case, I think a lot of funding pots don't or aren't are probably designed from a more traditional sense. So they see a project as being very contained. They don't think about any ongoing costs that might be there for hosting or support or other things when you're dealing with technology. And I think that's quite hard. That's certainly been our experience. But I would like to just shout out, there's a foundation, the Patrick McGovern Foundation, who are doing some incredible work in this space, understanding how funding pots could be or should be tailored for these tech type projects that aren't just as contained as perhaps some other projects might be.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point in that we're all learning at the same time. It's not like the donors know everything and are able to, they're also, we're all sort of in this together, learning how we should approach this, learning what's necessary. So for us, the way you write a grant it might be different now. Now it does include different aspects that we wouldn't have thought of 5-10 years ago.
So it is. We're all learning together, Hannah. We absolutely are. But look, Hannah, thank you so much for your time. I had to do a time check. I could have carried on talking and got into more examples, but it's fascinating, and for me, most importantly, really encouraging to hear the work that you're doing and you continue to do, and the fact that you are and carry on continuously improving products and solutions that you have out there, which is how it should be. This is what we want to be doing more of.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was so fun.
Thank you so much, Hannah.